People who become most upset by your boundaries are often the ones who benefited most from your lack of them. Makes sense. So there's certain people in our lives who don't just interrupt your peace, they quietly siphon it. And it's not because they're malicious, but because their patterns are perfectly designed to pull you off your center and into their chaos. I call them flow burglars. They're the ones who can shift your emotional state with a single text message or pull you out of alignment before you even realize what's even happening. The great tragedy is not what they take from you, but how easily we allow ourselves to be recruited into rescuing, fixing, validating, and cushioning them from the very discomfort that life intended to teach them. But what we're looking at today is that by playing that game, we're taking something from them as well. We allow ourselves to become valuable receptacles for their bullshit. Make sense? So most of us were conditioned to treat helping as a virtue. But the uncomfortable truth, and that's the one that Alan Watts pointed to, is that when you continuously rescue someone from the consequences of their own behavior, you're not helping them rise. You're actually blocking the doorway to their own evolution. In your attempt to spare them pain, you ironically end up stealing their growth while they're stealing yours. And by the way, the whole concept of pausing and looking at things from alternative perspectives is when you can see things from an alternative perspective and not make it all about what's happening to you, that's the space where you can win the game and figure out that there's something more going on here. You stop carrying burdens that don't belong to you, and you stop mistaking enabling for compassion. Real compassion allows someone to face their own consequences and grow from them. Enabling simply delays their awakening and accelerates your own exhaustion. Folks, that's called a lose-lose situation. And here's the part that most people struggle with once they've identified a flow burglar: removing access. Not from a place of anger or revenge, not because you suddenly hate the person, but because you finally realize that peace requires boundaries, and boundaries require first awareness. Now, if you look at the interface response system, the first step is called perceive, which refers to this concept called brain awareness perception. The most powerful thing we could do today as an action step is just to become aware, to move from offline to online, sleepwalking to aware. Remember, every flow burglar survives through access. Access to your attention, your empathy, your guilt, your emotional availability, and your nervous system. The pattern only persists because access persists. The moment that you stop reacting automatically, access gets denied, and something fascinating happens. The dynamic of the conversation and the energy exchange completely changes. So this is where conscious, voluntary unavailability becomes a superpower. Sometimes the most loving thing that you can do is step back far enough that life itself can become the teacher. Because every time you go save someone from their own consequences, you accidentally save them from growth as well. Make sense? So the IRS, the Interface Response System, reminds us to perceive, pause, process, and then proceed rather than reflexively rescue and grant access. And sometimes the wisest form of proceeding is becoming simply less available. To what? To the patterns that repeatedly steal your peace and your flow. Because protecting your flow is not selfish. It's a responsibility that you carry. People who become most upset by your boundaries are often the ones who benefited most from your lack of them, your lack of your boundaries. Now, let's look at the 5 archetypes. Number 1, the comfort clinger, also known as the effort sponge or the hammock hitchhiker. The comfort clinger is the person who uses your help like a hammock. Every time you show up, they sink deeper into comfort and unconsciously further from their own growth. They don't want transformation, they want relief. Their signature move? Asking for advice repeatedly, but never acting on it. They make you responsible for their momentum while they stay motionless. You end up every conversation feeling motivated, but them? They end every conversation feeling relieved. The IRS sorting filter question to ask them is this: what part of this are you willing to take responsible action for without me? If they can't answer that question, you've just spotted a comfort clinger, and it's time to stop being their hammock. Number 2, the ungrateful goblin, also known as the entitlement gremlin. Ungrateful goblins don't just accept help, They absorb it without acknowledgement. It's kind of like a hole in the ground that's swallowing rain. They treat kindness as currency that you owe them. And the more you give, the more entitled they become. No gratitude, no reciprocity, only increased expectations and entitlement. So here's why they steal your flow. Gratitude expands energy, and entitlement drains it like a siphon. You help them with a project, a ride, a loan, and instead of a thank you, you get, hey, next time, could you do it a little bit faster? So the sorting filter question for the goblin is this: how do you normally show appreciation when somebody helps you? Watch them glitch out when you ask that question. You've just spotted an ungrateful goblin. Number 3, the validation vampire, also known as the yeah, but. This is the validation vampire. So the validation vampire does not want your wisdom. They want your agreement. They come to you pretending to seek your guidance, but every suggestion that you offer is met with, yeah, but, no, you're not listening. Or actually, they feed on affirmation only. They fear correction. They want a mirror, not a mentor. So their signature behavior is to argue with every question unless it validates them and their point. These are the people that always need to be right. They choose to be right versus kind. And here's why they steal your flow. They drain you in endless non-conversations. You think that you're having a great dialogue with these people? You're not. You're performing in their theater. So the sorting filter question you can ask is this: are you looking for input or are you looking for confirmation? So a vampire cannot admit the truth, but that pause and their pause after that question will tell you everything and flush them out. Number 4, the narrative ninja, also known as the empathy hacker or the guilt magician. Narrative ninjas don't manipulate through commands. They manipulate through their stories. So they craft emotional narratives so compelling that you end up volunteering your help before they even ask for it. They are masters of implication, guilt, subtle pressure, and emotional acoustics. They sigh dramatically and say something like, "It's just been so hard. Nobody ever helps me." And before you know it, you're rearranging your entire schedule and dropping important things that you had planned for that day to fix a crisis that wasn't yours to begin with. And here's why they steal your flow. You end up emotionally responsible for a problem that was never yours, but you feel responsible for it. They're so good at this. But the sorting filter question now is this: what exactly are you asking me for? Because they don't think they're asking you for something. They're just complaining, and they're just used to having you come rescue them. So if you confront them, what exactly are you asking me for? The specificity of that question will break down their spell every single time. Number 5, and the final archetype of a flow burglar, is the hard-headed hurricane, also known as the repeat offender or the consequence collector. So this is the person in your life who knows better. They just refuse to do better. They swirl through life in cycles of self-destruction, and they drag you into their storm every single time that you try to help. They don't lack intelligence, they lack willingness. Their signature move and behavior are to repeat the same mistakes, then promise change. You become invested in their transformation while they remain invested in chaos. Each time you step in, they thank you until they return to the exact behavior that created the crisis. So the sorting filter question to ask them is this: what's your plan to change this without my involvement? A hurricane without a plan is just weather, and you can't negotiate with weather. So in closing, discernment is the new compassion. Once you learn to recognize these archetypes, which takes awareness, and also when we become aware, you no longer confuse compassion with obligation or guilt with responsibility. So discernment becomes your new compass. You begin to understand the difference between someone who is struggling and someone who is committed to staying stuck. By asking curious questions and observing patterns rather than making promises, you can see exactly who you are dealing with and choose a response that preserves your peace while allowing life to deliver the necessary lessons for them. By learning to perfect the interface response system, how to spot a flow burglar, you stop being the fuel source for other people's avoidance, and you return back to your own path, clearer, lighter, and infinitely more free. Make sense? That's it for this episode. I always say at the end, if you learned something today, give it away. Do me a favor, hit subscribe and like the video if you're vibing with this. It helps us reach more people who need to hear this message. Share this with a friend and comment with a topic that you might want to hear in future episodes. I want to make sure that we're talking about things that matter most to you.
Makes sense.